Morning. Morning. So we have a couple of folks in here today. We have good morning, Light Jeans and Lucas Gabriel and Matt Blender. Good morning. Good morning, Noah Luhanu or Lejano. I hope everyone's having a good morning so far. It's pretty nice here. It's a little gray today. I don't know if you guys can tell, but it's like the lighting's it's a little what it is. It's a little what it is. We're gonna have to deal with it, but that's gonna be okay. But I hope everybody is wherever you are. I hope that you're happy and safe. Good morning, Matt Gant. So today kicks off what I hope is going to be an exciting ongoing conversation about a couple of things. So I'm not sure if everyone here has been watching my recent videos, but last week I announced that I wanted to kind of focus these conversations around several topics, one of them being an exploration of the Constitution, and even for folks who aren't citizens of the United States, just a conversation about the Constitution, the history of the Constitution, what inspired the Constitution, why folks get so up in arms when you talk about the Constitution, why it like tends to really trigger things and tends to be a really great way to shut down a conversation. And then we're also going to be, as time goes on and folks have an opportunity to get their hands on Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, the Brazilian philosopher, professor. I believe he was also a teacher in the Brazilian school system. Congratulations. Thank you so much. You're at dinner, so can't participate, but I appreciate what you do here. I'm not sure what that means. Are you at dinner? Are you like on a dinner date? And you be texting at the dinner table? I'm not trying to call people out, but like details. And that also means like what time is it where you are? Where are you in the world? I'm guessing that you're likely somewhere in Europe, maybe. I'm guessing you're somewhere in Europe. Trying to think what would make it dinner time where you are. But those details are great to follow. Thank you so much for blowing up my likes this morning, Light Chains. Matt Gant is in Thailand. So so I'm hoping that people will be interested in this conversation. One of the reasons, and so I started to say, so we're going to be doing some reading later on, so folks can get their hands on Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. I think it's just a great way to dive into a conversation about, a learning space and creating a learning space and what it means to have a democratic learning space. And it's not going to be our Bible or anything like that, but it will give us some launching points in terms of principles that we might adhere to in developing a real co-learning space here, which is what I would like to turn these conversations. And for me, it's Sunday morning, so I figure like this is, there's a tradition at least in the United States, of having Sunday be like where you have Sunday school. So Matt Gant says in the US. Alina 8, thank you for joining us this morning. And so, Pedagogy of the Oppressed in the future, there are some versions available online. I think you can just do an internet search for Pedagogy Oppressed, and I'll show it again so people can see how it's spelled. Paulo Freire. And good morning, Tom Hall. And so for those of you, if you can get your hands on that, we're going to read through it very, very slowly. We're going to read it chapter by chapter. And just to give you a sense of how doable this is going to be, I'm going to show you what a chapter looks like. So this is chapter 1. This is chapter 1, right? So the chapters are pretty small. Chapter 1 goes from page 44 to page 70. So it's 30 pages. Is that 30 pages? Not even quite, not quite 30 pages. Something like that. And so we're going to be reading it and spending the whole week on a chapter, right? So people will read a chapter and then we'll spend a week and we'll talk about it. And if it seems like that's too much, we may break the chapters down, like do the first half of the chapter, what have you, just to be able to have a great discussion about it. So now going back to the Constitution, the reason for the Constitution is there's been a lot of talk especially in the United States, around free speech. Like last year, free speech was people were calling it freeze peach, like a frozen peach, freeze peach. And so people were up in arms about certain people who were, being shut down in terms of their freedom of speech. And the freedom of speech is the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And then there's the Second Amendment is the other big one that people are literally up in arms about, because it has to do with the right to bear arms and U.S. gun control. And however you slice it, we have a gun problem in the United States. It's either a gun problem because people don't know what to do with their guns, or some people think it's because we have too many guns. But the biggest problem is the number of people who end up being killed by guns. And a lot of those people are killed by accident because there are firearms and there's not adequate protection to keep people away from them. But you can't question those things because they're part of the Constitution. And if it goes against the Constitution, then conversation must end. Conversation must end. And so instead of ending the conversation with, well, it's unconstitutional to think about that, or it's unconstitutional to do that, I say let's look at the Constitution and really try to understand how we have come to think of the Constitution the way that we have. I don't have that answer. I don't have that answer, but I thought that together we could explore these things. Hey, Kearney, good morning. So one of the things actually that I discovered early in the process of the discussions about the Constitution, I looked at the Articles of the Confederacy, which were the first constitution of the colony of transforming the colonies into the United States, right? So and this is something that I have to really get into it. So Kearney, I'm mentioning this as you come into the room. In that it was stated explicitly that only Canada could be admitted to the Union. If Canada wanted to join the Union, they would be welcome. But anyone other than Canada, it was going to take, some serious discussion. So there was, I guess, a time when when the U.S. was hoping that Canada, Kearney says never, whatever. You should be so lucky. I don't know. Listen to me. So like these discussions about like how did we come to understand what it is that we understand about the continent. So yesterday I posted my first video looking specifically at the Constitution, the words in the Constitution, and I looked at the preamble to the Constitution. If people haven't had an opportunity to look at that video, I urge you to do so. We'll talk a little bit about some of this here. But another thing that I discovered as I was doing research on the Constitution is that there were several documents that became the inspiration for the Constitution. So the Constitution is a little bit boilerplate, y'all. It's a little bit boilerplate, and it's based on, and you're going to have to forgive me, I'm going to jump away. I hope I don't disappear. So the Constitution was apparently inspired by, or at least the Bill of Rights. And here's one issue. A lot of folks didn't want to sign the Constitution. A lot of folks, there were 70 delegates that were, selected to participate in the Constitutional Convention, out of which came the U.S. Constitution. And that it opened with a quorum of 7 states in Philadelphia on May 25th, 1787. So 1987 here in the United States was the bicentennial of the Constitution. And interestingly, this is funny because I spent over a year doing a play called Four Little Pages. And this is really funny because I was, I was a kid at the time, and I was the youngest member of a cast who we performed in Philadelphia in the sort of historical mall. And I did this play talking about it was a musical about the Constitutional Convention. So this was information that have been carrying around my whole life, not really knowing what to do with, right? Not really knowing what to do with it, but it was a lot of the details. It got into the disagreements that were had. There were people who proposed, we were going to have a king, and there were people who proposed that we should, do things based on population. There was just so much disagreement that happened during that Constitutional Convention, and a lot of people walked out. Actually, a lot of people walked out of the convention. So there were 70 to begin with. I think only 55 ever made it to the convention. And by the end, I'm going to say 16 of those people ended up not even signing. So you have, over half, but, not that much over half of the folks who were invited to participate, not even wanting to participate in this. And some of that had to do with the fact that people did not feel that the Constitution went far enough to outline what the rights of the people were going to be. And one of the biggest reasons was that it lacked a legitimate Bill of Rights, which would protect the rights of the states and the freedom of individuals as well. And so we end up with this thing called the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights are, I think, what, the first 9 or 12 of the amendments to the Constitution. And those are things like, freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, and, all of those things. The right to bear arms. So these things are introduced later on to get more people to sign on. And so the Bill of Rights, which becomes like the saving grace, the thing that we hear about, the things that people want to defend the most, because the Constitution basically just outlines the structure of the government, right? That we're going to have a Senate, we're going to have Congress that's going to be made of a Senate and a House of Representatives, that there's going to be an executive branch that is going to be, that's the president and the vice president, and that there's going to be this judicial branch that's the Supreme Court, right? So that's basically what the Constitution set out to do, and what powers those governing bodies would have, what powers they would have, and what limitations they would have, what they would not be able to do. So that's what the Constitution initially set out to do. And so then we have this Bill of Rights, which some people still did not feel went far enough. But the Bill of Rights was inspired by a few other documents that I want to spend some time talking about. One of those documents today. And it's taken me all of 15 minutes to say that. So, so the documents that inspired the Bill of Rights apparently were George Mason's 1776 Virginia Declaration of Rights, the 1689 English Bill of Rights, and works of the Age of Enlightenment pertaining to natural rights, and some earlier English political documents such as the Magna Carta, which was written in 1215. There's also mention of, I believe it's Thomas Paine's Common Sense, common sense. Now, I hope you guys are hearing me because I'm going back and forth and I'm looking at other documents on my desk. Yes, I'm glad you're here, Thomas. And so some people had some reactions to the conversation about the Constitution, obviously, and just we're really disappointed at the fact that we pay lip service to freedom, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and all those things, and we keep all that conversation safely within this document. But then in practice, do we live our values? And in the practice of governing in the United States, do we see those things? And is it worthwhile holding on to this document that was drafted and created by, a handful of extremely privileged men? I talk about in my last video that even in terms of who had the power to vote on the ratification of the Constitution, certainly, women didn't have the right to vote. Certainly, blacks didn't have the right to vote, and you were only really allowed to vote if you were propertied. And so there was a study that was done, and I linked to it in the video, uh, by, I believe it was Ratcliffe or Donald Ratcliffe. Donald Ratcliffe did some research, was just looking at like the different voting rights in the different states at the time, and it appeared that about less than 50% of even white men were entitled to vote. So all this liberty, all these freedoms that we have up in here really were not being made available to that many people, right? To a very small segment of the population. But hey, can't make everybody happy, right? So can't make everybody happy. So that was one thing that I wanted to talk about. And so I thought I would dive in, and I started doing I looked into one of these documents, and the first on the list was the Virginia Declaration of Rights. And this was by George Mason, and it was voted in, I believe, unanimously in Virginia in 1776. And for those of you who don't know why that date is important in the United States, that's also the time that we had the Declaration of Independence drafted and signed in the United States. And so I wanted to share just a little bit of it. And just to get everyone's thoughts on them. So the first of them is, it's a very different kind of document than the Constitution. And you guys can, you can all let me know if you agree with that. But it starts with, hey, hello, Dane S. Welcome to the broadcast. The thing that the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and remember, Virginia is the largest of the slave states. And so that this document is coming out of a place where at the time of its drafting, you had a subjugated population. And this is a document that's all about freedom. So I just want to offer you that as context. So it starts that all men are by nature equally free and independent, and have certain inherent rights of which, when they enter into a state of society, they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. That's what it starts with. So, I don't know. What do you all think about that? Hey, hard hacker. Wait, welcome to the broadcast. So what do you guys think about that? That all men are by nature equally free and independent, and have certain inherent rights. Again, this is coming out of Virginia. It goes on to say, let's say, welcome, hard hacker from Turkey. Dana says, all life matter. So yeah, so hey Fernandez Laura 251, welcome. And it's telling me that it's your first time on YouNow. I find it difficult to believe that it's anyone's first not time on YouNow. But welcome, talking a little bit about the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and the contradiction here being that Virginia was like the big old slave state, and they their Declaration of Rights became the inspiration for the heart of the Constitution. Minus 32294. Hello and welcome to the broadcast. This Declaration of Rights goes on to say that all power is vested in and consequently derived from the people. That magistrates, and I guess they're talking about the politicians, are their trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. So this idea, so the first item in Constitution is that we're all free. We're all free. Well, all. Who is all, right? Who is we? Who is we? So that's an interesting thing. Who is we? But the idea is that we're all free, or at least all men are free. I don't know, and I don't know if men is, a placeholder for humanity, but I don't know. So that's a whole other debate, right? So, and then the idea that power comes from the people, and that's that public servants are the people are there in the service of the people. It goes on to say that government is or ought to be instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people. Right? All of these things that there seems to be a heavy focus on the people. And it goes on in later items to say that no one should be entitled, no one is entitled to anything other than in consideration of their service to the people. It keeps going on, right? It calls for a separation of the legislative and judicial branches of government. It says that elections of members to serve as representatives of the people should be free, meaning people shouldn't be taxed, have to pay to participate in elections. That all power of suspending laws or the execution of laws by any authority without consent of the representatives of the people is injurious to their rights and ought not to be exercised. It talks about the right to a fair trial. It talks about that bail should not be excessive. It talks about the rights of search and seizure rights, that there needs to be a warrant, and there needs to be a reason, it needs to be outlined exactly why something is being searched. It talks about trial by a jury. It talks about freedom of the press. It talks about having a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, trained to arms. It talks about the uniformity of government. Hey, Stephanie Batchelder's first time on YouNow, not to call you out, but it's just telling me that that's the case. It's telling me that that's the case. For those of you joining us, we're reading through the Virginia Declaration of Independence, I believe that's what it's called. Yes, of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and we're reading through it because it was one of the things that inspired the Bill of Rights. So reading through it, and they closely resemble the Bill of Rights. Yes, there seems to be a slightly different focus, though, however, on the people. It talks about a uniformity of government. And the idea of uniformity of government was that we have one government, and so people shouldn't make their own government within the state, right? That there's one government that's uniform for everyone. It says that no free government or the blessings of liberty can be preserved to any people but by a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue, and by frequent recurrence to fundamental principles. It's very interesting. Another thing that it says, and it's kind of buried deep in another one of the items, is that people who are elected to office should have lots of opportunities to go back to not having the power of their office. That people who are elected to office should have the opportunity to go back to go back to just being a member of the general public. And again, all of this, we have to take so much. And then the final one, number 16, is about the freedom of religion. So here's this document again that's like rhetorically, it's a gorgeous document, and I urge people to go and read the Virginia Declaration of Rights from 1776. It was one of the documents that clearly was the inspiration of our Constitution that followed. But to understand that in the United States, we seem to have a problem with living in contradiction. This came out of Virginia, and many often will say that James Madison was one of the main proponents of the Constitution. James Madison of Virginia, George Washington of Virginia, right? So all of these folks from Virginia who were working to figure out how we could live in a society free from tyranny, the same tyranny that we were experiencing for, almost 200 years from under the British Crown. So we were trying to figure out how to be free from tyranny, and at the same time, we are living in a society that is where we have human beings in bondage. And so, clearly there were ways that we got around that we figured out how to live with the cognitive dissonance of having people enslaved. But I think it's important to remember that we're not talking about they weren't the most I don't want to say that they weren't noble, because they probably weren't. They had figured out ways like psychologically to dehumanize the people who were enslaved, right? The people who were enslaved. So we're not talking about people who were just out and out hypocrites, because it's the same as, people who consume, animals, for example. We figure out a way to make it okay to not respect the life of others, right? For one reason or other, right? And we figure out in our society how to live with things that are done in our names, right? So we know that this shirt that I'm wearing right now was probably made by a woman who was paid pennies, probably was working in India somewhere, probably was working in dangerous conditions, probably is living in a situation where things are dangerous, right? So these is the people who make our clothes all over the world are exploited, are terribly exploited often. And there's a great documentary called The True Cost, and I imagine that there's a little bit of sensationalizing that's going on in the film, but it does kind of track where our clothes come from and where they end up after we throw them out. And when I say throw them out, I mean when we put them in, when we give them to charity. We call ourselves giving them to charity. A lot of them end up in the streets in the Caribbean somewhere, where the people who were making their living by making clothes and selling them to other members of their community go out of business, because now there's all these cheap clothes. Clothes are so available in these countries right now that they become basically the trash. So they become the trash. So instead of people living on piles of just garbage, people are living on piles of old clothes from the U.S., from the West. So we understand that we live with contradictions every day, and so it's not hard to figure out. It's not hard to imagine that the framers of the Constitution were able to do so in the context of slavery, in the context of having second-class citizens, a laboring class that was exploited, people working as indentured servants, criminalized poverty, all of these things, right? So we know that is. I don't want to say that we're better than them, but I think that we do have to. And Tom Hall placed this, stated this really beautifully in a comment on one of the videos, talking about this idea that we see we imagine this past that is so idealized, where everyone is so perfect and everyone is so smart and everyone is so capable, and we want to get back to it. And we allow that to be our guidepost for the kind of future that we want to create for ourselves. And what it really is us buying into propaganda so that we learn how to be obedient, right? So we just want to, there's a group that benefits from us blindly following and believing blindly in the existence of an idealized past that we have, and we've fallen, and I think Tom, you used the term fallen from some greatness. But the fact of the matter is, we've been living in contradictions, at least in the United States, since the first colonies, first colonists got here, and murdered a bunch of people so that we could have some place to live, right? So let's see, what are folks talking about here? What did you think about, so Hard Hacker says, what did you think about the Ottoman Empire? I don't know much about the Ottoman Empire, and if you want to come on and guest and talk about the Ottoman Empire, that would be great. In fact, if anyone would like to come on and guest, I would love to have the second half of this program be not me talking, but be listening to folks now responding. I've shared a lot of stuff. Stephanie B says they were just coming from their own experience of having been oppressed. No, it takes time and maturation for people who have been victimized and I think you got cut off there, to accept something. Stephanie, come on and talk to me. Come on and be on the TV, be on the computer screen with me. I would love to that they are victimizing, and so yeah, So I think that there's a couple of things, and this is the hard part when we look at people coming from Europe, from Great Britain. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. There was great suffering. There was a population boom in England, and so you had this. You basically had a surplus of people, whatever that means. You had kind of a surplus of people, and they weren't sure what to do with them. That was one thing. But then the other thing that you did have, you had capital interest who financed trips into the New World, and it had and all of Europe was in that. Spain was in that. Portugal was in that. Italy was. They were all in that, right? So all of those folks were engaged in coming to the New World and exploiting it for this newfound wealth, right? So that's one thing. So this idea that people were simply escaping persecution, that's only part of the story. The routes were being paved by people who had money and wanted to turn that money into more money. And so they financed these expeditions into the New World to see what was going on. And then the question was, how do we extract the wealth from this New World and get that new wealth back home? And so in order to get that wealth back to Europe, they needed a laboring class in the New World. And for England, since they had so many people, there was an opportunity for people who were, living in this, in the midst of this population boom, who were starving, and all of the, one of the ways that the poor was dealt with was through the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church did all the monasteries had been shut down. In the Protestant Reformation, right? So you have all these poor people who are living in the streets, and so these poor people living in the persecution of their poverty, and there was an effort to criminalize that poverty, right? And force people into labor, even in Europe, even in England, right? There was a movement to enslave poor people in England. So now you have this opportunity to get all these people to the United States. And so Then you have people who are escaping persecution. But it's not like they were like, oh, how am I going to get out of this horrible situation? Let me go to the new world. It was like, hey, you can go to jail, you can go to the workhouse, or you can go to the colonies and be an indentured servant. And so those two things are going on. And so this is in response to what Stephanie is saying. You have people who were coming out of a situation of oppression, but they were coming out of one situation of oppression and moving right into another situation of oppression. So many of them died, right? So many of them died. And so the individuals who were responsible for the structure of that society were were exploiters, right? It was, the ruling class was, they were interested in continued exploitation. And it was only after being in the US for 100 years and setting up their own governments and setting up their own structures of power that they decided that they didn't want to be tied to the British crown anymore, because obviously there was a chance for them to make more wealth if they didn't have to pay out these duties to the crown, right? So it's I don't want to say it's complicated. It's not. The story though is not as simple as we had people who were under persecution in one place leaving and trying to set up a new society that was free from that same kind of tyranny. So what do you do about that? I don't know. So Kearney says it's silly to think that actually Canada exists in a big way because some rich people wanted hats made of beavers. So Kearney, speaking as the Canadian in the room, is sharing a little bit of that history. Kearney, also, you're welcome to jump on and talk a little bit about the history of Canada and what you know about um, the formation of that government and the founding documents of your own country. Um, there's certainly a fair amount of contradiction going on there as well. I don't know if people in Canada see it as the same as, I don't know if people in the US even see it, but I think that there's an awareness that something bad happened in the United States to some people that have allowed us to be in the place that we are today. And with that in mind, is it possible for us to, even if it's not, even if like if you don't believe in reparations, right? If you don't believe that, wow, we need to do something to make up for all of these things that happened in the past, can't one at least admit that we shouldn't, if we're letting go of the past, let's let go of the past. Let's really let go of the past. And one thing that I learned from working on this play, Four Little Pages, that was all about the Constitution and the Constitutional Convention, was that the framers didn't intend for it to last for that long. They thought, in 50 years we'd go back and we'd look and we'd see if it's working and draft something new. It certainly seems foolish to have a document that's so full of problems, right? So many problems that we've had to write amendments to undo things that were done in the past, right? But we have a record of these, terrible things like three-fifths laws and things like that are like woven into the Constitution, not into the like amendments, into the articles themselves. There's talk about population, how people are going to be counted, in this idea that certain members of the society were going to be counted as three-fifths of a person. So Legendary says there's no social justice because it's all about money, period. Money buys everything. I'm down for that. I'd love to know what other people think about that idea. I also feel like right along with this idea of the Constitution, like how the Constitution becomes the gold standard for morality in the United States, I think we sometimes fall back on the excuse of the dollar because even in social justice spaces, I'm in social justice spaces all the time where somebody says, yes, but we have to be able to make money. And I always say, why? And people look at me like, like something's like, people look at me like, I'm basically like I'm stupid, right? Because like, well, I'm naive because I don't understand that you have to make money. But I'm thinking to myself, well, why? Why is it that we have to make money? It doesn't hurt to ask that question. And what is it that we need the money for? Um, and could something else serve? And it may be more complicated, but is there a way that could serve us other than having to deal with money? Uh, while slave owners were mad because they lost their cheap labor and could not make as much money anymore. Okay, so we talk about that. I don't know if anyone has seen. There's a documentary that you can watch called "Slavery by a New Name," because I don't know that I don't know that they lost their access to free labor as quickly as people think. There wasn't like a date in 1865 or 1867 or what have you where suddenly cheap labor wasn't available, um, because we went from slavery to black codes in the South, right? So that criminalized a lot of the behavior of black people so that you could just put them in jail. And the 13th Amendment has a clause that says you can, if you are guilty of a crime, you can be enslaved. You can just straight up be slavery is a just punishment according to the Constitution for the commission of a crime or conviction for the commission of a crime. And so people were enslaved, continue to be enslaved based on these slave codes and Jim Crow laws, in the South and in the North too, for years. In fact, there are entire industries that depended on that free labor. U.S. Steel would not be, will not have been, without all of the free labor to get the raw materials needed to make that steel. Stephanie B says, if you do believe in reparations, what does that look like? See, I feel like again, it kind of goes beyond, right? If our solutions are based on one, a punitive approach to what the U.S. did to Africans. Slavery looks one way. Reparations looks one way. It looks like some form of punishment or penalty, um, which could come in the form of some kind of a fine, right? Um, if reparation really focuses on the root of the word and the idea of repair, like what was broken in the process of instituting slavery and the continuation of slavery as an industry, an institution in the United States for 300 some years. What damage was done and how can we repair that damage? And I think once we start to think of it in that way, it starts to look very different than, because a punishment can be arbitrary. I just want to cause you pain, I want to cause you some pain that you'll remember the next time you think about doing what you did. Um, so yeah, that might make people feel a certain way, but it wouldn't necessarily address where we are now. Whereas by looking at things in terms of the repair, it forces us to be in the present and maybe look at what some of the effects of slavery have been, but we also can look at, what our society looks like. Because the descendants of slaves, let's say, are not the only people who were damaged by the institution of slavery, right? And if one were given the choice to be enslaved or to be the person holding the whip, chances, I don't know how many of us would just jump to that. I think there has to be an effect on the body and on the psyche of having been the person holding the whip, right? And de Groy writes about in post-traumatic slave syndrome the idea that if you were raised if you were raised by slaves, what is the impact of that on the psyche? And then how is that passed on from generation to generation to generation? The same has to be true of someone who was, just living in the violence and in perpetrating violence that was normalized. And then that gets passed on from generation to generation. So what is the psychological damage to the whole country, to the whole world of having slavery as an institution? And so for me, reparations would have to look at, like, how do we today start dealing with what people are going through, what the baggage that people are carrying around because of that. And I don't think that, I don't know, have studies been done talking to victims of crimes when the person who committed the crime, based on the punishment of the person's punishment of the crime, or is it that the people who are targets of violence or targets of some kind of criminal activity, do those people have to go through something else in order to feel themselves, or in order to feel whole or move forward from that? So that was a long ass answer to a really simple question. Stephanie, I hope that answers some of it. So let me see. Legendary 444 talks a little bit about, again, slave owners mad because they lost their cheap labor and could not make as much money anymore. It's always been, how much can an individual get away with while making the most money before they get into trouble? Read the book, What Kind of Difference Do It Make? Is that the name of the book? So is the title Legendary 444? Is the title What Kind of Difference Does It Make? What kind of difference do it make? I'm gonna write it down, and I'm gonna do a little bit of a search for it. But so thanks for that tip. Yeah, y'all, we have a little bit of time left, so this has been a lot. A lot has I've dumped a lot on you. So we want to continue with this conversation. So in the coming weeks. So if you haven't had an opportunity to look at the video on the Constitution, on the preamble to the Constitution, we are going to keep working our way slowly through the Constitution over the coming weeks. And then, as I said before, we're going to be picking up Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and we're going to be working through that. And there's a chance that both things will be happening at the same time. It's not like we're going to read the whole Constitution and then we're going to read Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In fact, the Constitution part will be a continued conversation, and we're going to be hopefully basing some of what we, the way we practice together in this learning environment on some of the principles that are outlined in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Best pranks ever, welcome to the broadcast. So yeah, I would love to know what people think about this Constitution, and how might, from a grassroots level, we start seeding in communities, amongst our friends, in groups like either this one, or I would this is what I hope for. Here's where I'd like to go with this. This is just like a launching point, right? This is where we're kind of developing our own little curriculum, but that where I'd really love to see this live is in your own spaces. How can you bring some friends together and just continue these conversations, and so that when we come together in space, people can share what happened, and so people won't be bringing people on to guest won't be as awkward, because it won't be like, oh, I don't know what to say. people will be coming to this conversation having had conversations with others. And I don't care if you want to do it at the bar, if you want to go to the bar with a couple of friends and be like, we were reading the preamble to the Constitution. And yeah, this is what do you think about the preamble to the Constitution? What do you think it means? Do you think it still holds up in 2017? Best Prank Ever says, I'm Algerian. I want to visit America. I need to. Uh, you're getting. I don't know if it's that you're getting married to a girl. What do you think about it? I'm Algerian. I want to visit Mary. I'm getting married. So you're an Algerian and you're coming to the United States and you're getting married. I don't know. Do you want to? I don't know. Do you want to tell the story? Do you want to get on and guest and tell the whole story as opposed to think I don't know. I don't know you. I wouldn't know what to tell you, and I would certainly hate to give you any advice on what you should do. I mean, you're saying that you want to get married to somebody so you'd be a citizen of the United States? Oh, you need to get married. Yeah. I don't know. I would say don't do it, but I don't know. I don't know. Um, I don't know. I don't know getting, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know if, I mean, I don't know if that's, I don't know if that's something that you want to be sharing in the live stream. It might like, I don't know. I'm sure, I'm sure I'm being monitored. I'm sure they're listening in. So this is probably not the spot where you want to come to and talk about your plans to commit some kind of fraud. But hey, whatever. Yeah, so if you do happen to fall in love with someone who happens to be from the United States and you do happen to, build a relationship with them and it turns out that you're going to get married and come here, hey, but yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, you might want to jump off, delete your account right now, burn the computer that you were on, because like I said, I have no doubts that they're watching. That they're watching. I don't know. Maybe that's my ego, but I'm sure that I use enough phrases and things that I'm sure that there's a certain amount of monitoring of the things that I say because I talk about things that are probably on the revolutionary side. I don't know. I don't know. I try to be a peaceful person though. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want anybody to get hurt. I don't want anybody to get hurt. You know, other than as a direct active sense of self-defense. But I don't want to tell other people how they have to behave, and I'm not being here judging people who who are willing to fight for their freedom. But yeah, this is not the space where you want to talk about the commission of fraud, and I'm not going to get into that conversation with you. But best of luck. Um, yeah, best of luck. I don't know, Stephanie B. Are you up for it? Do you want to marry somebody? Do you want to? I know that would also that would also be a different crime, but I don't know. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's a fun. What a fun way to end this discussion, right? To have been talking about basically the fact that we, probably need to rethink our founding documents in this country to somebody saying, I just want to be there. I don't care. I just want to be in the United States. And there are lots of people who are fighting to be here. And I don't want to, it is a privilege to be a citizen of the United States. It is a privilege. And I don't want people to get the idea that I'm just like, I hate living here. I'm having a pretty good life. But it doesn't mean that we can't talk about um, the society that we live in and how to continually improve the society that we live in. I mean, every business is constantly in the process of rethinking the structure of their business and how to perform better, right? Their motivations for doing that may change from business to business, but businesses do this, right? In relationships, people are thinking about ways to improve the nature of the relationship, right? To stay, how to make sure everybody's happy. So why shouldn't nations do that, right? And looking back at this the Virginia Declaration of Rights, so much of it seems to be focused on this idea of a government operating in the service of the, the people. Um, yeah, Stephanie B says, too late for me. Well, yeah, I'd be happy to deal with your leftovers, Stephanie. If you end up with too much, I'll take whatever you can't, whatever you're having difficulty managing. I'm happy to do that for you. Care for you dearly. So, y'all, it was a long one. I hope that I've left you again. So today we ended up talking primarily about the Constitution and the situation that we were in as individuals were coming to the United States originally, some of them specifically for monetary gain, and some of them because it was an opportunity to get out of the bad situation that they were in. And 200 years into the game, there's a revolution, and we separate from England to get away from the tyranny of the British Crown, and there's a Declaration of Independence, and then 10 years later, just over 10 years later, there is the Constitutional Convention, and the founding documents of the United States were drafted in a room with 50 some odd men of privilege, ratified in their states in their various ways. But what about now? Just because that work was done doesn't mean that we can't go back and revisit these things. And so that's the conversation that I would like us to be engaged in the weeks to come. And again, I hope that you will leave today with some thoughts about how you want to talk about this with your friends. And don't be, people say it's like, well, it's not appropriate to talk about that. You know what? We talk about so much garbage. Instead of talking about the TV program, because that's what everybody knows, right? Everybody's familiar with that. Everybody knows the preamble to the Constitution. And so just to go through parse the preamble to the Constitution with your friends and say, what do you think that means? What do you think that means? So, and again, if you want to, please feel free to review the video on my YouTube channel. It's just Reg Flowers, and watch the videos as they come up. And again, I do hope that all of you will get your hands on a copy of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Thanks everyone for coming. That's it for this broadcast. If you're watching on YouTube, oh wait, hold on. One thing before we go. The Constitution is an inspirational document conceived by flawed individuals, but when read in context of our 250 years of history, there is a chance to, Tom, we're going to leave with this thought. There's a chance to what? To do what, Tom? We're all here at the seat of our pants. So while we're waiting for Tom, I hope you guys have awesome plans for the day. So, yeah, it'll be something. This is like Tom's computer froze. So let's see what Tom had to say. The Constitution is an aspirational doc. Let me reread that. The Constitution is an aspirational doc conceived by flawed individuals, but when read in the context of our 250 years of history, there is a chance to what? There's a chance to do something. We may have to leave with that thought. And Tom, you can also feel free. You can also leave the comment and keep that discussion. To form a more perfect union. To form a more perfect union. That's Tom's thoughts. Okay, so we'll leave it with that. And now that's it for this broadcast. If you're watching on YouTube, like this video. If you like it, share it, comment, subscribe. This is Reg signing off. Love yourselves. Peace.